Klobuchar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be brief. To my colleagues, thank you for being here, and thank you for your work on this. And Senator Ayotte, as I've already expressed to you, a special thanks for you wearing Carolina Panthers black and blue today after your Patriots got eliminated. Governor, I've well, I think it's a great step, and look forward to seeing it move through the process. Governor, I had a question for you. I am a personal friend of your speaker. I've known him for about 5 years, having been speaker down in North Carolina. To the point that Senator Cornyn is making, and I do agree to a large extent with what Senator Durbin said, but if we focus on, for example, the prescribed painkiller problem, then I think we're going to see an increased uptick in heroin abuse. I mean, it's obvious it's happened in North Carolina. It's a matter of state policy. We did a number of things to crack down on drug shopping and the sorts of things that we were seeing in the state, and there's almost a direct correlation between a reduction in those prescribed opioids and an increase in heroin abuse. So as a matter of state policy, what are you all looking at now? I'm also very struck by the fact that some states, there are great disparities between overdoses and deaths. I was shocked to know that ours had gone up 480% over 3 years, but it's still a fraction of what a state that's got 1.5 million people have versus a state that has 10 million people. So, what are we doing to address these specific issues, and what risk do we run of federal policy potentially hampering what you think and your speaker and your Senate leader need to do to address the things that are unique to some of these states that seem to have disproportionate problems?
Yeah, that's a great question, Senator, and I can't tell you why some states are being hit harder than others, but this I'm convinced of. I don't think that we would have the heroin problem in America if we weren't starting folks out on opiates that are sold over the drug counter stores. It isn't coincidence that our irrational exuberance around painkillers is matched by the rising heroin crisis. And so I am convinced that if we went back to the old policies on pain medicine, which is when someone has chronic pain, treat it, and treat it hard. But don't pass this stuff out as if it's not a problem, which is what we're doing. And, I'll give you an example, and I know we can all tell these stories, but the other day I had a reporter come into my office, and she just had surgery for carpal tunnel, what do we all call it. And I said, how many did you get? She said, what do you mean? I said, how many oxys did you get? She said, 80. I said, good. I said, how many did you take? She said, half of one. So there's 79 and a half left behind. 3 weeks later, my head of healthcare his daughter comes by. She's a sophomore in college. She'd had 4 molars pulled out. I said, did they give you any painkillers? She said, yeah. I said, what'd they give you? She said, oxy. I said, how many do you get? She said, 40. I said, how many do you take? She said, none. So there's 40 more. And my point is, there is no question that when we made it tamper resistant, folks went to the pure heroin because it's cheaper, it's easy to get. But we cannot lose sight of the fact that we were not having this problem prior to the invention of OxyContin. We just weren't. And we've got to go back to the source. I think as the senator from Illinois said eloquently, listen, let's remember, I mentioned Zohydro. When the FDA approved Zohydro, its own advisory panel, 13 members, I believe, voted 11-2. FDA, do not approve this drug. They did. So my point is, there is a correlation. If you talk to folks who are addicts, which I've done, and many, many times, 80, 90% of the times, folks say to me, I got in a car accident, I had surgery, this happened to me, knee, whatever it was, that led me into this mess.
Senator Shaheen wanted to add something.
I did. I think
We've talked about the FDA. Everybody here has talked about pharma and the role of prescription drugs. But what we haven't really talked about is medical schools and doctors. It's my understanding that most medical schools don't have any courses on prescribing medication, on recognizing drug abuse. And it seems to me that we've also got to get some attention from medical schools who are turning out doctors who are doing these prescribing practices without the history of what has been raised here at this hearing.
Amen.
Senator Hiott.
I certainly fully agree with Senator Shaheen on this. We have to engage the medical community on this, but also, for example, in New Hampshire, back when I was Attorney General, I was fighting for prescription monitoring then, and our state was late to the game on it, because when we look at this data and giving physicians the information that they can have, and that's one of the pieces of this CARA bill, is to support the prescription monitoring programs. Physicians that want to do the right thing, it gives them the data to understand if someone's doctor shopping. It also gives us the focus to know if a particular doctor is actually exceeding his or her bounds, because it's all focusing on them. And so that allows us to address that. But we have to engage the medical community, and I think SAMHSA, who you'll hear from, will tell you that, as I understand it, some of the work they've done nationally, 4 out of 5 people started with overusing or misusing prescription drugs. And to your point, Chairman, that you raised in your opening, we also right now with the patient survey are actually encouraging reimbursement based on how satisfied people are with pain, and that has to be addressed as well. And I know that CMS is looking at this, but it has to be a priority, because we don't, and this was brought to our attention from doctors who are concerned that if they're worried about an addiction issue, they're being judged on a survey that's saying, how's your pain satisfaction? So that has to be addressed as well.
Senator Portman and then Senator Klobuchar.
Yeah, just quickly, Mr. Chairman, I don't disagree with the comments that were made here, and as a result, in this legislation, we not only have the drug monitoring programs, which are incentivized, and to Senator Tillis's question about how the states will respond to this legislation, it doesn't mandate the states to do this. It does provide incentives, which I think is very important, to your point that every state's going to be a little different, and some states have done some really cutting-edge work, and they should be the laboratories of democracy in this, but we're helping them on this prescription monitoring program, including across state lines. Think about it. In our states, we may have a great program. In my state of Ohio, Southern Ohio, West Virginia, and Kentucky have different programs. You don't know if somebody got a prescription filled in Ohio and there without having better interstate, and that's something that the federal government can exclusively do. We have legislation on that. Second, this drug take-back program is incentivized in this legislation. So CARA focuses on getting some of those drugs off the shelves, which Governor Shumlin's absolutely right. The final thing I'll say, though, is that, having talked, to hundreds of people who are recovering, who have been addicts because of prescription drugs, I understand that issue very, very well, including the athlete I talked about earlier. But I will also tell you there are a lot of people I've talked to who jumped that step and went straight to heroin. And Holly's an example of that, as we'll hear about later from her mom, Tonda. And I think now, because heroin is so plentiful, I was just with the FBI in Ohio yesterday talking about this. The drug cartels from Mexico are in Ohio, they're in Illinois, they're in our states. Because it's so plentiful, because it's so cheap, it's not just about prescription drugs anymore. It has been a gateway for a lot of people, but now there is a problem we have directly with heroin, even first use. And back, in the days when we worked on this issue of cocaine and marijuana back in the 90s, heroin was not a first-use drug. It was a drug that you used after you had other gateway drugs, typically. With young people as young as 13, 14, 15 years old, they are using heroin today. So this legislation is comprehensive. It does deal with the prescription side, but it also deals directly with the heroin issue, which sadly we now have to confront, perhaps because of this onslaught that came from the overuse of pain medication, but now the heroin is upon us.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.